Hello everybody, welcome to Mojubá Capoeira podcast. I am Poncianinho. Today is Monday, 28th of June 2021. I'm going to talk about a subject that I think we speak a lot about this, but it's very profound. Perhaps I can say it's one of the most profound subjects in capoeira. Or may I say, one of the most profound subjects in movement. And since movement is such an integral part of our lives, therefore we can say it's one of the most important subjects. And that's the subject of creating meaning and purpose. I have been teaching, last week I was teaching and I was bringing a lot of information from my book. And what I tried to do is to really take some information that is a philosophical approach and transform that into sequences, movements. And we found out some really interesting things there. It felt like a good experience. It felt like not just a satisfying thing, but it felt like we left the classes with that feeling of something nice that stays with you a bit longer than just the class, and is just beyond the wonderful things that we get from just simply exercising. And I think it's to do with meaning. I think it's to do with really understanding things in such a way that they stay longer in your body. Then you repeat that, of course, again and again, and then those meaning become part of who you are as an artist. And then you can change and move and see things a different way later, come back to what you were doing in the past and think what was good about that. So it's a process that keeps giving. But if you have been following my videos or some of my lectures, or if you have been in class with me, perhaps you can see from the last 3 months, maybe even before, how much we've gone back into Ginga. And that's probably also to do with me having a class that is only Ginga. So one class a week, which is every Friday. It's 1 hour of Ginga. Now, when we say 1 hour of Ginga, we're not talking about one specific step done for 1 hour. It's all of the Ginga essence. Entrances, exits, feints, what comes before kick, what goes after kick. But we don't do the kick. We just work in that side of the dancer. The movements are sometimes hidden, sometimes explicit, but we try to understand more from departing from the point of view of the Ginga. Now, I'm going to read something I wrote this morning about creating meaning and finding meaning. But I wrote this, I just want to say that I wrote this because I've been studying a lot about the purpose of the body moving before the arms and the legs. Perhaps even more the arms. So I've realized a couple of weeks ago that a lot of our feelings, the feelings that we create in the game, they don't have to come just by mannerism. Mannerisms are very important. So much expression depend on the use of your hands. Your hands and your face, obviously, of course, even how you look. You can tilt the head a certain way and then really create a different feeling in the game, connect with the person a certain way. I mean, just let's think about a bow. A bow is a very beautiful thing, and it's just sometimes just a tilt of the head, just looking down and find that introvert moment. So these things will, obviously, this body language, I suppose, will add a lot to the game, will create different texture in the game. And even as I'm talking to you in this podcast, of course you cannot see, but I am actually using my hands to talk. So our hands are expressing a lot. But I feel that we must start in the body. And when I say the body, your hands are part of your body, but I mean the chest area, your back, your spine, your your abdomen area. So the trunk of your body, being able to move a certain way, generating sometimes the momentum, generating the composition of the movement. And then from that you start to add arms and position of head, and then the delivery of the leg. I say deliverance because maybe the legs will kick or will spring you to another movement. We use the legs so much in capoeira. So then what happens that you create this integrity in the movement. And I'm using the word integrity more from its origin, as if to say intact and something that is not broken. Now, in terms of movement, then what can happen, and most times should happen, is that you take this movement and it starts to, we say break the movement, as if that's how we say it, break dance, because you take the movement and you start to chop and change and break and change that. But once you start with the body, you have a much more clear idea of not only where you're coming from, what part of the movement, where is the movement coming from, but where the movement may go because you're coming from the area. So anyway, so the point is that Ginga has become a very important part of our practice lately. It always has been, but I think analyzing this way has given us a different light. And then you start to add these other flourishings with the hand, and the movement becomes even more satisfying. And perhaps that's why my students lately leave a class. I can almost feel that they are responding differently to this. It's also funny because I'm discovering things that my students are saying, I can't believe we haven't done this in 20 years, but I suppose some things just take a long time to mature, which is, I spoke about this before, like sometimes if the movement feels not so natural to you, well, allow time to mature, because you can learn something. There's value in learning something and still not feeling it natural, because with time, of course, this is quite obvious, then with time, I think it's also so obvious that we forget. With time, that thing that is quite fragile in the beginning will mature and become more part of you, but you just don't know when. It could be that you achieve something in a class there and then, and you come out feeling like you want to tell everybody about that. You want to send a message to someone saying, I did a handstand today, or I did a backflip. No, a backflip is a big one, right? If you come out of a class doing a backflip. I remember the first time I did a backflip, a full backflip. I really wanted to tell everybody about that. And I was, did anyone see that? Did you see me doing a backflip? Of course, it's a wonderful feeling. But I'm talking about things that takes a little longer to simmer, takes a little longer to mature. But they stay there for long as well. Almost like the longer they take to be realized, then perhaps they last longer. Obviously, that feeling of achieving a movement such as a backflip, it's wonderful. But now when I do a backflip now, it doesn't feel like that anymore. I'm not looking around saying, did you see that? And I don't feel I have to text anyone to tell them that I've just done a backflip. You've achieved, and there you go. You've got your medal. Next. These other stuff, however, they feel like, they last longer. So let me read to you this. I wrote a few lines on this. To discover the meaning of the movement is to feel the movement in your body. This meaning may even be, and in most cases are, very personal to you. This is deeply related to consciousness itself. However, although there are meaning and purpose that we discover, and they are very personal to us, there are places of common ground. These places are likely to depart from the language of movement itself, or what I call, more generally speaking, as the style. This will bring me back to the body, our instrument of work in this art. The instrument is as important as the player. Authenticity is felt when your body, authenticity is felt when your movements are in harmony with your ideas and your beliefs. You can see how relevant this kind of talk becomes, these points of common ground. So you can practice, and so your practice can flourish on a deeper level of harmonious energy. So if I just unpacked this a little bit, so obviously we're talking about meaning, finding meaning. Now here I'm suggesting that a lot of these subjective and sometimes abstract meanings that you may experience something in the class that you feel a different way than I do and then the person next to you does. And that's really powerful stuff, because that's you finding, sometimes I say finding, other times creating also. I think we create meanings. But I think that the meaning will come from when you start to feel the movement. And this is why it's so important to do the work of research and understand. So it may be very personal to you, but also as you start to unpack the ideas and the movements and the sequences and the philosophical approach in the game, you realize that there are also some common grounds. Now, these common grounds are very important for the game, because when we can understand how does that, it's almost like saying, maybe I play the guitar, you play the flute, but I know what it's like to engage with my instrument and feel the melody and how to flow on the strings of the guitar and what it's like to learn a new song. And you playing an instrument is a musical instrument, but it's a different instrument, it's a flute. But also you know what it's like to find the harmony of your sounds and to sit down and play and be taken by the sounds of your instruments. So then when our instruments meet, we're trying to interact and create harmony. And there are many points of common ground, even though there are points that are different. I'm plucking the strings and the flute is a wind instrument, it's a different process of sound. So the common grounds are the places where we want to also flourish in our game. And then I say that these places are likely to depart from the language of movement. So it is important. Details will matter. Now, I don't mean details as little details of hand, that at some stage will be important as well. I mean details such as what is that language of movement, what style, what tempo, what speed, these things will matter. This is where we actually start to separate different forms, and then we can take that form and understand that form and then change and use to our creativity. Now I say then obviously this philosophical approach will, when I establish that it comes from the language or the style itself, then it brings us back to the body. Then the body has to do the work. Now I made a little analogy, and I'm talking about the instrument. In the case of capoeira, now if you have a guitar, then the sounds come from the guitar, but the player, obviously the guitar is there and the player is making those sounds. Now I'm just saying that obviously in capoeira we are the instrument, as if the guitar is playing itself. Saying that the instrument, the body parts, are as important as the creative mind behind. Because maybe sometimes we have this idea that the feelings and the meaning and the purpose, all of these things are a job of the mind and the heart. And what I'm suggesting is also the understanding in the body. It's as important as this part right now, which is talking about, thinking about, meditating about. We have to find the combination between those two worlds. They may come from a podcast, from listening, from a song, from the physical training. And I have had many examples of this. I had examples of people that are not in tune with any of this. They're not thinking about their movements. They come into training capoeira. They're not thinking, they're not taking any philosophical approach. And sometimes I present the movement in a certain way that then they are, I want to say they kind of awaken to that movement. Something in them something in them awakens to the possibility of meaning behind the movement. Some things are easier to see, like if we if we're doing a fast kick, a powerful kick, it's easy to read a narrative behind that. But when we're talking about body before arm, flourishing with the hand, the tilt of the head, the postures of bow, when we talk about that, that's different. That has to be presented in a certain way as to awakening the students the desire to learn more about the movement. And then finally, I talk a little bit about authenticity in here, because yes, that is a hard word to unpack. What does it really mean to be authentic? But I don't think it's a word we should shy away. I think it's a word that we can also understand that when your movements are in line with your ideas and your beliefs, you are being authentic to that idea. Now, then we can argue that different approaches are better or worse or more healthy or whatever we want to talk about authenticity in terms of timeline. A lot of these things are discussed as well in our art form. But I am mainly talking about when you have an idea, when you learn something and you practice and you start to align them, you start to harmonize those ideas, those feelings, those textures, and the body can actually replicate that. Then that's like saying a painter that has a clear image on the head and can actually put that image on a canvas. Now, that painter is just being authentic to the idea because I managed to replicate. And sometimes it's not a picture, right? Sometimes for a painter can be a feeling. I want to paint the feeling of this. I don't want to paint a picture of this. Can you see how he actually gets even more interested? Because now I'm talking about being authentic to your feelings. And then obviously capoeira as a game give us a great feedback on that. It tells us what is going against our nature. It tells us what is in the right path of empathy and empowerment to each other. And then you have a body of music behind all of this that can really support the growth of your ideas, can really support the growth of your authenticity in your game. So then the craft becomes even more interesting because now you're matching everything that you're doing to a certain rhythm. And I think what that does to us is when I match those ideas, my harmony, let's say, to a rhythm, I'm giving it real life, a palpable thing. I'm giving life into the bounciness of it, into the waves of it. We can count. What an interesting concept that I can say, I could take a game and say, I'm going to count that musically, the way you've bounced, the way you've held your handstand, the way you've looked, and then we can even put in mathematical terms. Now, obviously, that's something I'm not suggesting us to do. I'm just saying it becomes interesting that as you add all these values, then you could do the job actually, again, unpacking that and seeing how much behind, how much ground you have created for your style to flourish. So, with these things, we are expecting a practical answer, and I think that's right, and that's what I've been trying to do. I think it's right that we are talking about this, but we also want to be able to see some evidence. Not that should diminish the value of talking about, because sometimes that creates a immense flow of energy into your movement. You might go to a class tonight, you might train a little bit tonight, or you might just take a time where you're having a cup of tea, or you close your eyes and you can see your movements done in a different way. You are now meditating, a visualization, and that just this conversation itself can add an extra meaning. But obviously you also want to be able to practice this, and this is where I think the sequences can help. The sequences can help because I can take these ideas and then open them up and say, okay, this movement is generating. Let me give you some more practical examples that I did this week. I used 3 to 4 movements only in a sequence, but the fourth, or actually the fifth movement, has to depend entirely on the very first movement. So if I went to a skiver, for example, and then I brushed out of the skiver, and as I brushed out of the skiver, I also used my hands to push the floor away from me, as if to propel myself opposite the first intention of the skiver. And then that brought my leg. I brushed the floor again with my leg, I lift into a kick, and then on the way down of the kick, I'm also lowering my body forwards to go into a bridge or to go into a relais. But that forward movement is happening at the same time as my legs. So I'm really understanding the use, I'm understanding the body weight. I'm understanding what my leg is doing. My leg is telling my body to go. As my hands touch the floor, then I turn into a bridge or turn into a relais. And at the end of the relais, I'm using all of that momentum to come back up in a handstand. Now, we can do all of that instinctively and still get that idea behind. But to be able to work like this, it's really quite magical. And it takes a little time, but then after you do a few times, the sequence has something else behind. Again, I'm repeating now, but it feels like the sequence has a deeper value, a deeper meaning. And it's not just because you took time, that of course, because you took some time, you gave value by actually saying, let me take time to understand this. But also, your bodies then start to give you that feedback. You've gone too fast, you've lowered the leg too fast, you didn't control at the end of the kick, so then under the eyes of your teacher as well, that is wonderful, because the teacher can say the reason why that's not working is because now the leg needs to be held a little bit longer there, or the hand needs to be a little further forward to go to the bridge. When you go to a handstand, maybe stretch your legs a little higher. All of those points, which I call points of mastery, will then add up, and at the end you finish feeling that you've done the job of an athlete, but you've done the job of an artist. Those two things coming together in one class. So I think it's enough for today. We're on 22 minutes. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I would appreciate if you let me know in the comments if you like. What do you think about this? Have you experienced, even more if you can give me some stories, have you experienced these moments? Have you experienced these moments without really realizing now, maybe because you've heard this, it's come back to you, that a certain class or a certain game had a different meaning because you understood this way. And also it's an optimistic thing for me, because it just gives me more energy to work and to find the beauty behind the movements. So I hope you have a fantastic week, and I also hope to see you next time on another podcast. Obrigado. Thank you.